I am in Bremen, or at least an exclave of Bremen that happens to be completely surrounded by the city of Bremerhaven. Bremerhaven is one part of the state of Bremen, of which Bremen is the other part, and they're separated by... Okay, look, this is going to take some time to explain. Thank you.
Last year I made a short in which I asserted that since Berlin, Hamburg and Bremen are city-states, they don't have state capitals, and I was immediately corrected in the comments. The state of Bremen is actually two cities, Bremen and Bremerhaven, and its capital is the city of Bremen. And that's true, I stand corrected, but it's a bit more complicated than that, and what makes Bremen even more confusing is that there is a part of Bremen inside Bremerhaven. So, for that reason, and no other, I decided I had to take a look for myself.
Yeah, of course, now what I realise is that this is going to be a video about two cities, so, cue music.
And this is a clue as to the main driving force behind the history of Bremen and Bremerhaven. It's the remains of a 19th century dry dock, built using what was at the time cutting-edge technology. But let's start this video properly, in the bigger and older of the two cities. Bremen does attract quite a lot of tourists, and if you've already visited, you're probably already familiar with, at the very least, the marketplace. We'll get back to that, but first let's talk about this weird geography. One of the first things you notice about the state of Bremen is that it's in two separate parts. There's the city of Bremen itself, but about 50 kilometers to the north is the city of Bremerhaven. The only way to get from one to the other is through the state of Lower Saxony. But it gets worse because inside Bremerhaven is an exclave of Bremen. Not many people live there because it's mostly docks and warehouses, but it's a little piece of the city of Bremen completely surrounded by Bremerhaven. So, how did we get to this state of affairs? Well, to answer that question, we have to look at the history of Bremen, and it's very old. Humans have been settling here for thousands of years on the river Weser, but protected from floods by the dunes. In the 8th century, while Charlemagne was busy Christianizing this part of Europe, the Diocese of Bremen was created and a cathedral was built and dedicated to St. Peter. This is obviously not the original, but a much younger replacement. The main doors feature biblical scenes, but as the church acknowledges, some of the depictions of the Israelites and Jews are a little on the anti-Semitic side. These carvings have been kept as a reminder to the faithful that they mustn't think themselves immune to prejudice. As it turned out, Bremen's location was quite fortunate. Ships could sail up the river Weser and unload here, so during the Middle Ages the city grew in importance as a city of trade and commerce and joined the Hanseatic League, a trading partnership of cities and towns in Northern Europe. How this helped increase Bremen's wealth is evident in the historic architecture that still survives from this period. If you've seen some of my previous travel videos, you'll recognise the Roland statue, which stands guard over marketplaces in many northern and eastern German cities. This one was erected in 1404 to replace an earlier version, but the bishop took offence. He interpreted it as standing in opposition to the authority of the church. Thanks to his overreaction, Roland statues everywhere came to be seen as symbols of liberty and independence.
So here's what slightly depresses me about this place. You can be looking at something like this and then you just turn round and
Of course, like most major German cities, Bremen was heavily bombed in the Second World War and had to be rebuilt. Not everything was put back as it originally was, and unfortunately Bremen was one of those cities that decided to embrace the age of the motor car, which led to this.
Seriously, this is basically the entrance to the historic city centre.
Okay, let's not be too harsh. It seemed like a good idea at the time, and there are worse places in Germany. It's also worth bearing in mind that cities like this have always been changing and evolving, so it's hard to know what counts as its original state. This ensemble, for example, was built in 1911 to look older than it is, incorporating bits from older buildings that had been demolished. And then the whole thing had to be rebuilt in the 1950s. And we have a reference here to the Town Musicians of Bremen, a fairy tale about 4 elderly animals hoping to find fame and fortune. In the original story, they never actually reach Bremen, and it's even possible that they were looking for a much less famous Bremen, not far from where the Brothers Grimm grew up.
Now, the average tourist might miss this one. It's a spitting stone, and it marks the spot where Gescher Gottfried was executed. This was the last public execution to take place in Bremen. Or possibly it's the place where her head rolled to after it was beheaded. Nobody seems to be quite sure. She killed 15 people by poisoning them with arsenic while pretending to nurse them back to health.
Her first victim was her husband, followed by other members of her family, her second husband, a fiancé, friends, her landlord's wife, and a 3-year-old girl. All the time it was thought they had fallen ill, and she was selflessly caring for them, earning her the nickname of the Angel of Bremen. It wasn't until her landlord found strange white granules in his ham that the truth came to light. Just off the marketplace is a part of town that was built in the 1920s in a style which, 100 years ago, must have seemed daringly new. But if you're here at the right time, you can join the crowd of tourists listening to this glockenspiel play a selection of tunes. Let us also enjoy these modern sculptures depicting, apparently, day, night, evening, twilight, and youth, who appears to have been polished by generations of, I'm guessing, young male tourists in serious need of a girlfriend. Tucked away in one corner is a reference to a legend about the founding of Bremen. Fishermen looking for a safe place to settle saw a hen with her chicks and reasoned that if chickens could live here, so could they. And then there is this building, built in 1927, partly as a museum dedicated to an artist called Paula Modersohn-Becker, and which itself was conceived as a work of art. 9 years later, Adolf Hitler made a speech in Nuremberg denouncing this building and everything it stood for, but he also suggested it should be allowed to remain as an example of the degenerate art that everyone was supposed to hate. That's when this image of St. Michael killing the dragon was added, supposedly symbolizing the destruction of the past and the introduction of the new 1,000-year Reich. This fountain depicts the story of the 7 lazy brothers. Unwilling to work on their father's farm, they travelled to faraway places. But on their travels, they learned new ways of irrigating farmland and so were able to save their family from starvation. The fountain includes the inevitable town musicians, but the last one is missing, replaced by a sign. I wonder though if the translator was aware that the English word these days is used with a very different meaning and how long it will be before the sign is stolen. More bizarrely, it is claimed that during renovation work in 1991, a leg bone belonging to the donkey was found, together with documented proof that the story is true. As my father used to say, if you believe that, you'll believe anything. But returning to reality, Bremen's strategic location on the river Weser made it a convenient port, and this being such an important factor in the city's success means that there's no way this is going to turn out to be a tacky tourist trap. It wasn't just trade and commerce, but supporting industries related to shipbuilding that got a boost. One of the oldest parts of the city, which survived the Second World War relatively intact, is named after its main street, Schnur, from a Low German word meaning rope, since that was an important thing that was manufactured here. In fact, if you're interested, this is the headquarters of the Institute of the Low German Language, that being a kind of sister language to the High German the standard dialect is based on.
Of course, if you want to do something to really tell your friends about, you could come down this little street and rent what claims to be Germany's smallest house.
It's about 4 square meters in total and can accommodate up to 2 people for about €100 a night. If that's not impressive enough, down this alleyway is the Wedding House, which is probably the smallest hotel in the world. In the Middle Ages, couples from outside the city could rent an apartment for just a couple of days to prove they could afford a place to live, apparently a requirement to get married. Looking at a map, we can easily spot the telltale signs of a system of Baroque city fortifications built in the 17th century and now a much appreciated green space. But we can also see this little piece of land, the tar yard. Tar was important for shipbuilding, but it was a fire hazard, and so the city ordered the tar makers to relocate here for safety reasons. And not just that, but gunpowder was also stored here for the same reason, which caused a nasty explosion in 1739. Incidentally, the buildings you see here now are mostly modern, but built as apartments and offices to resemble the old pack houses. But the port of Bremen was quite a long way inland and had problems with its tiny docks silting up. By the 19th century, it simply wasn't able to cope, and this is where we travel north to the mouth of the River Weser. In 1827, the mayor of Bremen, Johann Schmidt, bought some land where the River Geester flowed into the Weser, where bigger, more modern docks could be built. This was Bremerhaven, literally Bremen's harbour, basically the docks themselves with somewhere for the workers to live. This land was purchased for 73,658 thalers, 17 groats and a penny from the Kingdom of Hanover. This is the village church of Geestendorf, at this point still owned by Hanover. It was likely built in the 15th century to replace a much older wooden church, although this depiction of the kind of thing the locals prayed very hard about is clearly much more recent. Hanover had never allowed the settlements here to build any decent harbours, but with Bremerhaven under construction, the kingdom was spurred into action. This map from 1849 shows the new settlement of Geestermünde, hastily founded so that Hanover could build its own docks and compete with Bremen.
As far as I can make out, this is the historic centre of Geestermünde, and Bremerhaven, this is no way to treat a historic marketplace.
Incidentally, while I was searching for some good views of the docks, I found the most random tourist attraction I have ever encountered. Huh? It was a prop for Troublemakers, a spaghetti western comedy starring Bud Spencer and Terence Hill in their last movie together. The prop found its way to Bremerhaven, disappeared, was tracked down by fans, restored and put on display here, outside a training centre for the unemployed where the average tourists will never find it. Bremerhaven, of course, grew and established itself as a major port. And if you're American of German ancestry and your ancestors left Europe in the 19th century, there's a good chance they came through here. The main campus of the college is built on the site of a building that housed emigrants as they waited for their ships. This is the only remaining fragment of that building, which was only in operation for a few years before the railways meant travellers could easily plan to get to Bremerhaven on the day they were due to set sail. Here it is, converted into a brewery. Today, this monument is supposed to represent the rocky transition to an uncertain future. But for Bremen itself, the port's success started to become a problem. Here's the situation. The city of Bremen owns a small patch of land on the coast for its maritime industry, but the towns of Leer and Geestermünde are competing with it and drawing trade away from the city of Bremen itself. So, beginning in 1887, Bremen started building new, modern docks, still within the city limits, but a little way out on the outskirts. This is the first of them, the Europe Dock. This one is now a marina, but some of the docks in this part of town are still in operation. In the 1920s, the towns of Leer and Geestermünde were amalgamated to become the new city of Wesermünde, but it still wasn't part of the state of Bremen. And then, In 1938, something interesting happened. The city of Bremen took over the big harbours in the north. Then in the following year, the city of Bremerhaven itself was handed over to Prussia and amalgamated with Wesermünde. This left Bremen in charge only of the shipping terminals, and it remains so to this day. This was, and still is, one of the most important ports in the world. As a free port, it has its own customs and taxation regulations, with customs posts on the roads leading out of the area. In fact, the customs post at the southern end was built in the 1930s and features a Nazi version of the imperial eagle, although the swastika has been removed from it. Following the Second World War, more changes were made. What was the free and Hanseatic city of Bremen became a state in its own right, like the city-states of Berlin and Hamburg. But this new state then also acquired the city of Wesermünde, which was renamed Bremerhaven. And so the situation is as follows. Bremen consists of the city itself, plus a port as an exclave. That exclave is surrounded by the city of Bremerhaven. Both cities together comprise the state of Bremen. And this became a problem when the COVID pandemic first hit. Bremen became a hotspot while Bremerhaven had relatively low infection rates. Since the port counts as part of Bremen, it was subject to stricter regulations even though it was physically located in Bremerhaven.
This arrangement has consequences. Although this is a part of Bremen, certain responsibilities such as garbage collection have been delegated to Bremerhaven. The Bremerhaven police patrol on land, but on the water, that's the responsibility of the Bremen police.
In a sense, the city of Bremen is the capital city of a two-city state. But then the members of the city parliament of Bremen are also members of the state parliament, while Bremerhaven has its own city parliament. So I think it's more accurate to say that Bremen is a city-state, but one part of it has a high degree of autonomy. But that may be hair-splitting. Perhaps the best we can say is that Bremen is unique in Germany. Finally, I can confirm that Beck's beer really is brewed in Bremen, Germany, as the ads claim. But the company brews other beers as well, and if you want to set yourself apart from the average tourist, go for Harker Beck. That's the one the locals drink. If your ancestors emigrated through Bremen, you should probably consider visiting the German Emigration Center Museum in Bremerhaven. There are 2 trains an hour between the two cities. The RS trains take around 45 minutes and the RE trains are about 10 minutes faster.